The 2003 version of Freaky Friday has got to be up there as one of the most nostalgic cinematic experiences of my youth. It's a film that seems to be a very perfect time capsule of the early 2000s, which of course makes it feel very dated at times when you watch it, but also gives it so much charm. Despite a lot of problems on the production side of things, with actors dropping out of the project at the last second and scripting issues, the film ended up being a bit of a triumph. It got good reviews with critics and did pretty well for itself at the box office, all things considered, grossing $160 million off of $26 million. That being said, it did very much feel like a one-and-done sort of movie that didn't have much room left for a sequel. They wrapped up the story they were trying to tell well, with Tess and Anna learning to see things from the other's perspective and growing closer as a mother and daughter, and there you have it. All's well that ends well. Maybe you would get some sort of remake in the future at some point, as remakes do seem to be all the rage for a lot of older films to give a reboot to a nostalgic property, but that would be really it, wouldn't it? I certainly wasn't expecting it to get a direct sequel film 22 years after the initial release. I mean, yeah, we're in an era where proven IP are a hot commodity to try to make an impact at the box office, as people are less likely to go out to the cinemas unless it's something that they know is going to be enjoyable. Freaky Friday does technically tick those boxes in that it's a film with a proven track record of success financially and has some name value, but still, who could have guessed that it would ever be getting a sequel, which was announced in 2023, almost 20 years after the initial release of the film? I will admit at first it had me baffled as to why they were doing it at all. Yeah, they announced that the two most important actresses would be coming back, but in the end, that would mean nothing if the creative direction was bad. On top of that, the first looks we got were not promising at all. It just seemed like it was doomed to be a sequel film that would come out, be pretty terrible overall, and in the end, tarnish the legacy of the original simply by association. The reality is that the concept would likely feel derivative without some true, tender love and care being woven into the script, and there would be the shadow of that first installment that would be constantly hanging over its head. However, that's not what happened though, is it? In the end, they've actually managed to make a film that would manage to avoid crashing and burning, at least in the critical sense, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of 73%. It's not a bad score at all for what the movie is, and to be honest, I'm pretty surprised by it, considering this is the type of film that usually gets shredded by critics in this day and age. On top of that, the film is doing well with audiences, with a 93% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes as of writing this. This is also something that surprised me quite a lot, because I figured this would be a movie that might suffer from the nostalgia effect, that people would always have this harsh comparison ready to level at it. Beyond that though, the original film, if you look at it on Rotten Tomatoes, actually has a pretty terrible overall score in terms of its audience reception. It's certified rotten, and so I suppose that also gave me the idea that this film was going to be copying it from every single direction. Side note, but I have no idea why the score for the original is so low. I always thought that this was a true early 2000s classic, yet it has such a poor audience response that it's rather baffling. Doesn't matter now though, I suppose. What does matter is that the new film is actually genuinely good to watch. I tell you what, it's nice to find yourself being pleasantly surprised by a film, and also finding that the fact that you enjoy it is not the minority opinion. That I don't need to be mounting some sort of desperate defense video to try to justify why I liked it, and try to explain how everybody else is wrong except for me. No idea how it's going to go at the box office though, to tell you the truth. As of right now, it's apparently slated to gross around $27 to $30 million, and I assume that's at the North American box office. It has a budget of $42 million, so hopefully it well and truly succeeds, because it really does deserve to. However, the reception and these early numbers are good signs. Maybe it's not going to manage the gross that the original got at the box office, but I do think it's going to be considered a success by the time all is said and done. I ended up going to see the film, and as I said, I was apprehensive. I had no real idea as to how things were going to play out, and I ended up being surprised by pretty much every aspect of the movie, to the point that I kind of think it's superior to the original. This might come across as a controversial statement, or like my recency bias is taking over, which I suppose is a fair take to have. All I know though is that if you ask me which one I'd rather sit down to watch again, I would say Freakier Friday. It was just a lot of fun, and it's a film that was clearly not taking itself too seriously, which is exactly the tone that needed to be set. Nobody wants to see a pretentious film that's trying to make itself more than it is. Here, the filmmakers knew what they needed to do, and what it needed to be, and they executed it to perfection. It's not going to be winning an Oscar, but it's probably some of the most fun I've had at the cinema all year, and unlike a lot of films whose jokes simply have me doing a smirk or the classic nose exhale, Freakier Friday actually had me reacting far more than I usually do, whether that's laughing, smiling, or cringing into an out-of-body experience. This film is getting you invested. Before we start digging into the actual storyline and all that comes along with that, I also just wanted to say that this was a really good cast that put in stellar performances across the board. Of course, this is especially true in regards to the four leads. Don't get me wrong, Mark Harmon, Manny Jacinto, Chad Michael Murray, they're all really excellent supporting members of the cast alongside a bunch of other side characters. But in the end, it's the four leads, Jamie Lee Curtis, Lindsay Lohan, Julia Butters, and Sophia Hammonds, that are the focal point of the movie, and they all shine. I mean, Sophia is doing a pretty dodgy English accent, but I did think they were all able to so effortlessly capture the nuance of the character switch. I mean, I knew that Jamie Lee Curtis was going to be just fine going ham as a teenager in an old woman's body, but I wasn't sure if Lindsay Lohan was washed at this point compared to the peak of her career back in the 2000s, or if this younger pair were up to the task as well. In the end though, it was clear that they all hit it out of the park, and as a result, the film was filled with so much absurd fun. I think it was very much helped by the fact that they were intentionally going with a very campy, over-the-top style. If it had to be played a bit more seriously the whole way through, I don't think it would have worked nearly as well. Now though, we gotta get stuck into this story, right? Freakier Friday picks up 22 years after the events of the first film, with Anna and Tess Coleman, the two protagonists of the first movie, in the midst of a somewhat uncomfortable co-parenting relationship. After getting pregnant early on in life, Anna decided to take a step back from being a musician and has instead become a music producer and manager, with her current client being the young new sensation known as Ella. Meanwhile, Tess has continued being a very well-known therapist and author with a new book on the way who's become very involved as a grandmother, pretty much becoming a second mum to Harper, Anna's teenage daughter. At the same time, she's also jumped on the modern trend where every single person of note in the world has a podcast where they preach their nonsense to their audience about whatever tickles their fancy. I thought that was a nice touch to really ground the setting in the modern day. What I really enjoyed about this opening though is that for one, you could see that the characters were very much the same people as they were in the original film, but with those 22 years tacked on. Both time and the events of Freaky Friday have actually changed who they were as people. We can see that Tess has become a lot more involved in her family life. Not that she was a neglectful mother or anything in the first movie, I just think her career pulled a lot of focus too. Here though, she seems to be very much involved in depth with her daughter and her granddaughter, to the point that Anna finds her a bit clingy and overstepping. However, they don't address these feelings because the events of the first movie have left them both extremely averse to conflict. They liberally use therapy speak in their day-to-day lives and are constantly trying to take a breath to calm down during intense conversations, whilst also leaving space for Harper. I very much enjoyed this because it helps it feel like a proper sequel as part of the world, and like these are actual people who have grown and evolved over time, not just characters on the screen. On top of all of that, the chemistry between Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis is as electric as ever. They make such a good on-screen duo. I would 100% want to watch them together in something else for sure, which makes this early section of the film so fun to watch, even if you're getting a lot of exposition to explain what's going on. At school, Harper's constantly finding herself clashing with Lily Davies, a new girl from England who is honestly a bit terrible. Yes, over the course of the film we learn that her mum died and that's why she's sad and lashing out, but in this early section of the movie, whilst it seems like the movie wants to make it seem like everybody is somewhat in the wrong, I kind of think that it heavily skews towards Lily being very insufferable, and Harper being pretty normal and simply standing up for herself against somebody who bullies her, and then whose father her mother begins to romance, not giving her a single reprieve from this girl in her waking life. They get into an argument in science and then Lily ends up causing the experiment to blow up, and yet both of them get in trouble for some reason. Seems fair, doesn't it? On the way to meet with the science teacher, Anna and Eric meet for the first time, and refreshingly, there isn't any sort of blame game, enemies to lovers sort of BS going on here. They don't have them be these types of out of touch, my kid can do no wrong parents. They're accountable, and they're vibing, and they start to date via calendar montage with the help of the science teacher, who goes so far as to book them a reservation for dinner, she's shipping them so hard. Another quick side tangent, but that teacher character is one of the highlights of the movie. Just really fun and dynamic. Once again, I'll reiterate that this is something the film does really well across the board. The side characters are fun and interesting. They perfectly add that necessary spice to the scenes they appear in, and they bring a lot of variety to the film in general. After about 6 months or so, Eric and Anna are ready to be getting married on October the 3rd. My girlfriend tells me this is a Mean Girls reference and thus is very funny, but I haven't watched that movie in years, and so I'll have to take her word for it.
On October 3rd, he asked me what day it was.
It's October 3rd.
Also 6 months and they're ready to get married? 6 months within which their children have not stopped hating one another for a single solitary second? Talk about a major yikes moment. At least when Tess was getting remarried in the first movie, it was 3 years after the dad had died and presumably after knowing Ryan for more than 6 months. It does feel like they're needlessly rushing into things here, doesn't it? Plus, Anna is 100% on board with moving their family to London? Why? This guy has a restaurant in LA and her job is also based here being a music producer and manager. On top of that, she'd be uprooting her own kid's life so suddenly after knowing this guy for a grand total of half a year. Yikes, mum, yikes. Also, why have they not sought therapy? Harper clearly feels that her mum resents her for putting her music career on hold, and Lily's not coping with the death of her mother, which is sort of implied to have been relatively recent. All in all, not exactly the most stellar parenting going on here. Part of me thinks that Eric also deserved to get his ass Freaky Friday to give him a fresh perspective on things. Not saying that they should be breaking up, but rushing into things and not talking it all through properly is the entire reason this movie story exists. Kind of funny considering Grandma is supposed to be a famous therapist. At Anna's bachelorette party, the fighting continues, and a random palm reader gives them a double helping of the swap curse, with Harper and Anna, and Tess and Lily swapping bodies. Here is where the movie really starts to lean hard into the absurd comedy that just permeates it in the best of ways, and where the acting really takes off for the leads as they get to sink their teeth into their takes on the other person's characters. I especially loved how the fashion would shift to suit each character's new personality. It's a lot of visual fun to be had here. Whilst at first Tess and Anna just have to get through their day as best they can by going to school and getting detention, where they stick out like a sore thumb because they're out of touch adults, eventually they ditch school to search for the fortune teller to give them the information they need about how to break the curse, but not before taking advantage of being young again to spend time together having some fun. At the same time though, Harper and Lily in adult bodies have been hard at work trying to get the wedding cancelled. First, they go to a photo shoot with Anna's client Alla, where they help her get over a breakup and have some fun, before they learn that Anna's written a song that they believe is about her ex from the first movie, Jake. These smooth brains decide that it's going to be a great idea to try to seduce this dude somewhat to get Eric to break up with Anna. This is probably one of the best scenes in the entire movie, especially when it becomes clear that this dude has absolutely zero interest in Anna outside of being friendly, whilst he's still holding a massive torch for Tess. I know it kind of goes against the ending of the first movie where it seems like he's more into the personality of Anna rather than the physical looks, but the gags of him lusting after the grandma and then bringing a date to the wedding who is styled just like her from the first movie, they were funny enough to justify it in my eyes, to tell you the truth. Harper as Anna starts to get cold feet about the whole disrupt the wedding plan though, as she goes to the immigration interview and realizes that Eric really does love her mum a lot, and later she learns that he's trying to learn to surf to be able to spend time with her. She pulls away from the plan, and Lily, as Tess goes nuclear, sabotaging the rehearsal dinner so spectacularly that Eric calls everything off, leading to Lily having her own come-to-Jesus moment where she realizes that she's being selfish in her choices. She convinces Eric to go after Anna, who makes her way to Alla's concert where she and Harper play a duet of the song, which is revealed to have been about Harper all along. Everything's restored to normal, and Anna and Eric get married, and it's all happily ever after. Honestly, it really does all end rather abruptly there, but the concert section, especially when Pink Slip reunites to play their song from the first movie, Take Me Away, that nostalgia carries the finale of this film off into the stratosphere of perfection. In the end, this movie is not doing anything new, and in many ways, it's simply a variant script of the original. However, I think they perfected the formula. They were able to craft compelling characters, funny dialogue, and insane jokes. The film was colourful and nostalgic and yet still modern. The relationships and the chemistry were convincing, and there was a lot of heart to the story too. It wasn't all goofiness. There were excellent moments of pathos and drama that underpinned everything. Hell, it's gotten to the point that I would not be opposed to the idea of a Freakiest Friday to round out the thing in a couple of years. I suppose we'd better wait and see how this film does before we start pitching that though, right? I gotta say, it's nice to have these sorts of movies hitting the cinema again instead of just going straight to streaming. Let's hope for its success so we can get more of this sort of thing going forward. I do think that 2000s nostalgia is an untapped goldmine, and so I'm excited to see more projects from that era come back and get their moment in the sun again. The Zillennials are eating good right now. Of course though, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Freakier Friday? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.